Sonic the Hedgehog Megamix is often considered the best hack of Sonic the Hedgehog 1. This game has a history spanning over a decade and 2 separate platforms, and it had an all-star team behind it, featuring hackers such as Aquaslash, responsible for previous Hacktoberfest feature, the S Factor, and led by Stealth, one of the masterminds behind the incredible Sonic Mania. And playing through Megamix, you can see a lot of the things that would ultimately make their way into Sonic Mania. Before Sonic Mania, there was Sonic Megamix, and that's what we're covering on today's video. Welcome to Stuff We Play, home of everything weird and retro, and if that sounds cool to you, why not subscribe? And today, we're covering Sonic Megamix, and this is a big one. This is going to be the biggest of the 2017 Hacktoberfest reviews. So buckle in and let's get started. Sonic Megamix. This technical marvel of a ROM hack's had over a decade worth of development, with the first release coming out for the 2005 Sonic Hacking Contest. While there is a version of Megamix I consider to be definitive, for the sake of this look at the game, I think it's best that we look at 3 different releases. Version 3.0, version 4.0B, and finally, Unofficial Release 5.0. These 3 versions span quite a bit of time, so we have a lot of ground to cover today. So with that, let's get right into it. Sonic Megamix version 3.0 was released in 2007 and is sometimes billed as a complete version of the game. It's easy to see why, because if you ever buy a reproduction Sega Genesis cartridge of the game, this is the version that will most likely be on it. Getting straight into the gameplay, there are 2 characters present here that were never in any of the mainline Genesis Sonic titles: Shadow the Hedgehog and Mighty the Armadillo. Shadow can perform a double jump, a homing attack, spin dash, and, at a cost of 5 rings, a chaos control, which gives him a huge instantaneous burst of speed. Mighty, on the other hand, controls exactly like Sonic did in Sonic 3, even as an insta-shield. So what about Sonic himself? Well, Sonic is by far my favorite of the 3 to play as. Yes, he has his classic spin dash, and he can do a peel out like in Sonic CD, however, he can also do a homing attack, and most fun of all, an air dash. Reminds me a bit of how he controlled in Sonic Winter Adventures, another ROM hack covered for Hacktoberfest, though the homing attack feels a lot less finicky here. Besides these additions to gameplay, the level designs are completely different and each zone is renamed, with Green Hill being Sunset Hill, Marble Zone being Dark Fortress, etc, etc. A lot of these new designs are quite fun, though some such as Dark Fortress and Misty Maze tend to drag a bit and, well, be a bit too maze-like for my liking. Furthermore, as great as this game plays on the whole and as smooth as it usually runs, I did find a few glitches here and there. But then again, it is a beta, and not even the most recent beta, so that is to be expected. Also worth mentioning is the music. Most of it is lifted from other Genesis titles or are Genesis covers of music from other Sonic games, but what's here is very good. My favorite track would have to be music from Misty Maze Act 3, which is funny as that's my least favorite act in the entire game, but that's alright because the music here is from Ristar. And honestly, if you don't know what Ristar is, it's an incredible Genesis platform by Sonic Team that I definitely need to dedicate a video to someday. So graphically speaking, most of the stages in Sonic Megamix, with an exception of Misty Maze Zone, look pretty identical to their Sonic 1 counterparts, just with palette swaps. To be honest, Megamix V3 is a great ROM hack of Sonic 1, however in this current form, I don't think it is the best form, or has even surpassed other ROM hacks, such as the S Factor. So James, I hear you shout, why are you covering this version of the game? Well, because this is the final release of Sonic Megamix to be released for the Sega Genesis. The Sega CD. Poor platform doesn't get enough love. I'm sure the folks who had a hand in making Megamix would agree. Since starting with version 4.0, Sonic Megamix was a Sega CD game. And this release is nothing short of stunning. Well, Okay, maybe that part isn't stunning. Yeah, one drawback of being on a CD console is load times. Right off the bat, if you go into the game's options menu, you'll realize that 2 more playable characters have been added, bringing the total to 5 different playable characters, each with their own unique play styles. Fittingly enough, these 2 newcomers are Tails and Knuckles, retaining their respective flying and gliding/wall climbing abilities from Sonic 3. And let me tell you, this release is truly above and beyond most other Sonic ROM hacks. Oh, okay, not that part. That black screen is just another load time. Surprisingly though, from here on out, these only occur when you enter and exit the special stages, which by the way, much like in a 3.0 release, are just alterations of the basic Sonic 1 special stages. So here we are, Sunny Shore Zone. Yeah, they changed the name from Sunset Hill, though this is the only zone to have that done to it, but it's understandable why. What before is just a more evening-like version of Green Hill is now a beautifully vibrant zone full of high-speed antics. Granted, all the other zones contain the graphics from V3, but this new starting zone is a great indicator of what could be done in future releases. Also of note here is the bosses. They're all either new or at least very different. All of them are a blast to fight too. Well, I mean, except for the one Misty Maze Zone. That one's still just a Labyrinth Zone boss. A further note is that besides a few new CD quality sound effects, the soundtrack from V3 is still present here. And I won't complain. It's good stuff. The game feels faster and flows better than ever, and zones such as Dark Fortress and Misty Maze are a lot faster and less labyrinthine than they were before, while the likes of Starry Night Zone are now a much more thrilling romp. It's pretty easy to see why then, after stating all this, that I would consider this to be the definitive version of Megamix. Yes, it has its fair share of glitches, damn you Dark Fortress Act 2, though it's still completely playable and absolutely worth your time. Sonic Megamix version 4.0b was released in 2009 and was the final official release of Megamix. However, work still continued off and on in the project until 2016. In that 7-year span, the game was completely overhauled, with several Team Megamix members leaving. Then, in 2014, Team Megamix file sharing server was breached by someone wanting to, and I quote, spite Sonic Retro, even though the project itself was not an official Sonic Retro project, and leaked a build of the game from late 2011. Team Megamix themselves were noticeably upset by this breach of both server and trust, but ultimately decided to give an official download for this particular build. At the time it was released, this was called version 5.0, though the team would prefer if it weren't referred to as such. In fact, Stealth would later note in a blog post, "We can't afford to care about this anymore. So rather than let people continue spreading misinformation and selling their egos over nothing, we're making it available ourselves with this statement. This is not a release in the traditional sense, and we would honestly prefer that you do not download and play it." Later adding, "It's unstable in general, and it probably does not work well on real hardware. Despite these warnings, I went ahead and downloaded the ISO of this version for the sake of this video. After all, it is the most recent release of the game." Now, before we get into version 5.0, let me make something clear. If you want to see an extremely technical, impressive Sonic ROM hack, continue watching. However, if you're just here to find out what the best version of Sonic Megamix to play is, just stop and go ahead and download version 4.0. It's much more stable, and some zones in 5.0, due to the complete overhaul, aren't even fully playable. But hey, if you're still here, let's get on with the rest of the video. So with that out of the way, let's get into the game itself. Even in this sometimes glitchy, unfinished form, it's absolutely incredible. Yes, entire levels such as Starry Night Zone Act 1 are near unplayable, due to being in the midst of the overhaul and thus not even being complete, but what is present here is quite fun. Gameplay and characters are the same as in version 4.0, but there is one huge addition to this version: a new CD quality soundtrack. This is an absolutely stunning effort, full of completely original compositions, and these original pieces evoke the same feelings that I would later feel when listening to the Sonic Mania soundtrack. Of course, if you prefer the old Genesis soundtrack from versions 3.0 and 4.0, you can toggle that in the menu. But I'd rather not, because this new soundtrack is amazing. Furthermore, this game has had a bunch of graphical updates, from there being completely different loading screens depending on which character you are, to zones getting completely new layouts and graphics. This is very impressive. Also new here are the bosses, which have all been completely redone for this version. Perhaps most impressive of all here, though, are the new special stages. Gone are the Sonic 1 special stages, and instead are a new set where you control Sonic in a 3D environment to try to catch UFOs and collect rings to boost your time. Mind you of any certain official Sonic game? Of course, here they're running on Genesis hardware and are quite obviously incomplete since they lack music, and actually completing one crashes the game, but it's a technical marvel regardless, and it's amazing to see what is very likely the basis for the special stages in Sonic Mania. So let's finish the story of Megamix. For quite a while, there was nothing but radio silence on the official Team Megamix website. That was until the 30th of April 2016. As a post from Stealth. Here, he officially declared the game cancelled. He cited numerous reasons, such as the team moving apart and him being the only consistent remaining member. However, he noted that he would like to continue working on the project in his spare time, so as to clean up the current version for a presentable final, quote-unquote, release, and then to release the Megamix engine to the public. He mentioned, though, that he was not sure when he'd be able to get to these releases, due to, and I quote, "I'm currently occupied with a contract project that's still going to take a good bit of time to complete." He did not go into any details on this project. However, seeing as by this point Sonic Mania had been in development for quite a few months, I think it's safe to bet that that was the project in question. I think that's a very good assumption to make, and I think it's easy to see that Megamix influenced a lot of Mania, from the style of the soundtrack to types of level design seen in the later releases, to even the special stages, especially the special stages in the 5.0 release. With all this in mind, I think that Sonic the Hedgehog Megamix in many ways can be considered the closest relative to Sonic Mania. But you know what, perhaps I'm just rambling at this point, and so why don't you leave me your opinions on Sonic Megamix or Sonic Mania, or pretty much the Sonic series in general, down in the comment section below. And while you're at it, why don't you subscribe to Stuff We Play for more great content like this. So with that, thank you very much for watching, stay classy, and I will see you next time.